This is the softest and lightest ciabatta recipe you'll try. It doesn't need any oil, fat, or sugar, and the best thing is that you can add almost anything to this ciabatta. It makes for perfect sandwiches, goes well with soups or sauces, and you can throw in practically any inclusion from fruits and nuts to olives, herbs, and more. That's why I've called it the anything goes ciabatta, because it's the perfect stage for pretty much everything. I'm going to show you why and how to make it based on science. Hey, Seraphin here. Welcome back to the channel. I once read an article that claimed ciabatta is the perfect bread for people who don't like bread. And I was perplexed. What does that even mean? How can ciabatta not be bread? I thought to myself, I've made ciabatta so many times and it's definitely bread. That line is crazy. And with that, I put the article in the back of my mind. I never thought about it again until the day I used ciabatta to make an ice cream sandwich. I did it on a whim. I made a tester portion first, and my mind was ready to refuse this weird combination. But shockingly, it tasted good. Hard crust aside, the flavor of ciabatta blends with the ice cream. And that really got me thinking, what doesn't taste good with ciabatta? It's so versatile. From all sorts of sandwiches to soups and sauces, ciabatta is seemingly perfect for almost everything you throw at it. And that's when it hit me. I finally understood the article. Ciabatta is indeed not particularly bread-like. To explain, it's like how many people don't really consider thinner pizzas to be bread per se, even if the doughs are made of the same things. Ciabattas are mild in flavor and aroma. Much like pizzas, they lack that heavy, lingering flavor of fermentation. This lighter, softer taste allows it to go with everything. So when the article says that ciabatta is perfect for people who don't like bread, it's probably right. And the most captivating part? This might be more than just an opinion. In a scientific paper from 2021, scientists found that this kind of smaller loaf results in lower persistency than several other shapes, meaning the flavor of the bread doesn't linger as long on the palate. It was also rated as one of the least bitter shapes, being described as having a salty and wheat aroma. And while that study was done on sourdough bread from Spain, I think it illustrates how vital shape can be to bread and how it could influence the flavor of ciabatta bread. If you pair this with the fact that ciabatta is made with more water, you get a fantastic soft bread that has a mild, salty flavor without bitterness. The ciabatta's universal popularity and the way it took over every bakery from New York to Los Angeles by 1999 may have been less about how flavorful it was and more about how comfortably mild and soft it was, perfectly pairing with anything. And in this recipe, we're going to take an extra step to make the ciabatta even more versatile. We're using the Tangzhong method. If you've watched the channel for a while, you know how awesome this method is. You just need to mix boiling hot water with a bit of the flour, and it will not only make the bread softer, but also allow it to stay softer for longer, increasing its versatility. This method also has the added benefit of making the dough easier to handle, making it act like a lower hydration dough. It prevents our home ovens from drying out the bread, making sure we get soft ciabattas while allowing us to handle the dough better. In a previous video, I made a 100% hydration ciabatta with the Tangzhong method. But this time, we've made a lot of adjustments to the recipe so that it's easier to make, and we're also adding a new method of mixing to the dough, which will make it even easier to handle. I'm also going to show you a couple of easy ways to add inclusions into the dough, hassle-free. Now, Tangzhong is, of course, not a traditional step in ciabatta recipes, and in that video, some people argue that this shouldn't be called ciabatta as a result. I personally think we're trying to maintain the spirit of the delicious ciabatta, but you can feel free to call the bread anything you want. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into the recipe. This recipe makes either 2 medium ciabattas or 4 smaller ones depending on how you want to shape and divide it. There are no complicated techniques. This recipe just needs a bit of patience and some prep work the day before. So for certain inclusions like dried fruits and nuts, you may want to soak them for a few hours before adding them to the bread. Otherwise, they could create some dry holes inside the dough as they soak up water. And if you're using herbs, you might want to lightly heat them up in some olive oil to infuse, then add that olive oil along with the herbs to the bread so that the flavor compounds are both better distributed and also better preserved. All right, to start with the recipe, we begin with day 1.
We're making our two flavor boosters, the Poolish and the Tangzhong. You could make the Poolish and Tangzhong on the day of the recipe, but trust me, this overnight step is what takes your ciabatta from good to absolutely incredible. Okay, first up, the Poolish. In a bowl, we'll whisk together the flour and the instant yeast before adding any water. This just gives the yeast a bit of a buffer before adding the water, preventing it from dying due to sudden rehydration. Then pour in the water. Grab a fork or a pair of chopsticks and mix it all together until you have a sticky, shaggy mass with no dry bits of flour left. And that's it. Cover the bowl, let it hang out on your counter for about an hour to get bubbly, and then pop it into the fridge to develop amazing flavor overnight. Next, we'll tackle the Tangzhong. We'll first pour boiling hot water into a bowl atop a scale before immediately tossing in the flour and stirring vigorously. You're looking for the moment it transforms into a thick, slightly glossy paste. It should happen almost instantly, and that's a good sign because that means the starch granules are undergoing starch gelatinization, which is the key to the Tangzhong method. If you live in a colder climate, you may want to heat up the bowl first with some hot water to make sure that the flour is fully gelatinized. And once it's smooth, cover the bowl to let the Tangzhong cool down, and then it can join the Poolish in the fridge for its overnight rest. Now, you could also do this, again, a few hours before making the main dough, but the overnight rest really improves the flavor, and I highly recommend it. All right, on to the next day, or a few hours later. Our pre-ferment has been working its magic, and now it's time to bring our main dough together. We've got our flour already measured inside a large mixing bowl, and we're going to start by scraping all of the Poolish into it. Then we want to toss in the salt and add about 3/4 of the water, pouring it over the salt. Now we mix this up using our hands to get it thoroughly combined and knead it a little. This should take around 2 to 3 minutes. You don't have to mix in all of the dry flour, but do try to get most of it in, get most of it hydrated. Then we'll toss the remaining water into the Tangzhong and use our scraper to break up the gelatinized starch, mixing it until you have a smoother and more liquid mixture. This is especially important if your Tangzhong wasn't allowed to rest overnight because it'll be stiffer and you really need to break it up so it doesn't form lumps inside the dough. Add about 2/3 of this Tangzhong and water mixture to the bowl now and knead it in. You want to try to get the Tangzhong inside the dough, almost folding it in. If you've ever tried hand kneading butter into your dough, then this is a similar process, but a lot easier. After about 2 minutes of mixing and kneading, we add in all of the remaining Tangzhong and repeat the same process. It will feel stickier and messier at the start. It's perfectly normal. Just keep folding and squishing the dough for about 3 to 4 minutes until it starts to come together as a single cohesive mass. When we get to this point, we're done. I do like to make sure that the entire dough is well mixed though, so I normally knead this or do some slap and folds for a minute or two. But to be clear, we're not looking for a perfectly smooth dough yet, because we're gonna build the dough's strength over the next couple of hours with a series of folds. So cover the bowl and let the dough rest for 30 minutes. Then we can do our first round of folds. So wet your hands to prevent sticking, reach under one side of the dough, stretch it up, and fold it over the center. Give the bowl a quarter turn and then repeat 3 more times. If the dough feels very loose, you could do more folds until it tightens up. And that's our first set. So we cover it up and let it rest for another 30 minutes before doing another set of stretch and folds. I've timed these, and after you get used to them, each round of stretch and folds takes about a minute. And we're already done with our stretch and folds here. Okay, after that, it's another 30 minutes of rest, and then we move on to our third set of stretch and folds. Now, if you're adding inclusions and you don't want to take the dough out of the bowl, then this is where I recommend adding them in. The gluten network is already quite strong and well developed at this point, so adding inclusions here shouldn't disturb it too much. I usually just sprinkle the extra ingredients into the bowl, adding a bit more after each fold. That being said, if you want a more even spread of the inclusions in the bread, then you do need to laminate the dough. To do this, we would spray a surface with water, take out the dough and stretch it into a wide, even layer. Then we sprinkle our toppings onto it, fold over that, and sprinkle more toppings, and so on. At the end, we put the dough back in the bowl and continue with the recipe. At the end of the stretch and folds here, I also like to round out the dough, flip it over, and then fold it onto itself a few more times. This helps prepare it for the next stage. Because after we let the dough rest for another 30 minutes, we'll switch to a gentler technique, coil folds. With wet hands, slide your hands under the center of the dough. Lift it straight up and let the end tuck underneath itself. This is a beautiful way to build structure without knocking out too much air. The dough should already feel very strong at this stage, and it can pass the window pane test. You do this 3 more times. Now, we give the dough its final uninterrupted rest during bulk fermentation. Cover the bowl and let it sit for about 40 minutes. It's time for shaping now. We want to liberally flour our dough, and I mean liberally, and we flour the work surface as well. This dough is sticky. And then we firmly scrape the sides of the bowl before flipping it over. It should fall right out. We now want to pat the dough down, degassing some of the larger bubbles, and stretch it out. Very gently. Here, you can divide the dough into either 2 or 4 parts up to your preference. And in terms of shaping, you can either simply divide the dough and leave it as it is to make a more abstract and relaxed ciabatta shape, or fold it once to make it taller and more rectangular. These 2 methods of shaping should give you a slightly more open crumb, but if you'd prefer a denser crumb, you could also degass a bit more thoroughly before tightly rolling up the dough like so. No need to stretch it or anything, just make sure that most of the larger bubbles are gone if you want that even crumb. And that's all the shaping this recipe needs. When we're done, we want to move the ciabatta dough onto separate pieces of parchment paper and cover. We're letting them proof for about 1 hour or until they're almost doubled in volume. They should look puffy and feel delicate to the touch when they're ready. You do want to make sure to give them enough time to rise because underproofed ciabatta bread looks a little like this, often with big gaping holes from tunneling. Still delicious, but not ideal, of course. And while the dough proofs, get your oven preheating to 230 degrees Celsius. I love how the dough looks when it's fully proofed because it's so jiggly and beautiful, an absolutely stunning dough. When the oven is hot, we want to slide our dough into the oven. I'm using this wooden board, but you could use a flat pan as well. And then we bake for 10 minutes at 210 degrees Celsius with the fan on before bringing it down to 180 degrees Celsius and baking until the crust is a deep golden brown all over, which should take about 10 to 15 more minutes. Every oven is different, of course, and you might have to adjust the settings to fit your oven. You might also want to rotate the pan if needed to get an even bake on the bread. And just like that, you've made magic. I know how tempting it is to tear into a loaf right away, but letting it cool completely on a wire rack is really important. It allows the crumb to set and for the bread to fully cool down, preventing it from becoming gummy. Your patience will be rewarded, I promise. Happy baking!
And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching and bye!